If Robert Kennedy was at Marilyn's, what happened? Will we ever know? Remarkably, there is a way to reconstruct their final explosive confrontation. While Marilyn Monroe and the Kennedys were pursuing their affairs, they were not doing it in private. Here at her home, there were microphones in her house and taps on her telephone. The same was true of Peter Lawford's house on the beach in Santa Monica, where she often met the Kennedys. One of the people listening in was Chicago mob boss Sam Giancana, and he had good reason.
Almost certainly because the mob, which was at that time being pursued as never before by Robert Kennedy as Attorney General, that the mob had learned about his relationship and his brother's relationship with Marilyn Monroe, and they were trying to get dirt on them.
Giancana and the mob must have found enough to embarrass and probably ruin the president and the attorney general, and incredibly, it is this same illegal eavesdropping system which allows us for the first time to glimpse Marilyn's final hours.
It seems that this bugging system in Monroe's house was active from March, April 1962 until the very night of her death.
During his years of research into the mysterious death of Marilyn Monroe, investigative author Anthony Summers discovered evidence of tape recordings from the last day of the star's life. It is not clear whether those tapes still exist, but witnesses who have heard them report that 2 men came to Marilyn's house that day.
According to 2 people I've talked to who say they heard the tapes made on the last day at Marilyn Monroe's house, one of them being a security consultant who was involved in the operation, the other being a man who had the tape played to him. They say that there appear to have been 2 visits by Robert Kennedy. At the first of them, there was a big row between Kennedy and Monroe, in which she was complaining angrily that the Kennedys had fallen down on a promise. Even the suggestion that one of the Kennedys had promised to marry her, and she believed them. And Robert Kennedy was responding in fury to this, and tempers were rising.
This scene, if Summers is correct, sounded angry and physical.
And then apparently another visit, sounds of doors opening, people arriving, and then a resumption of the row. But this time, Robert Kennedy is demanding for her to give him something. Keeps demanding, where is it? Where is it, Marilyn? You've got to tell me where it is. We'll come to some arrangement. The family must have whatever it is, and it's never clear what it is. And perhaps he was asking about the diary. Others speculate that perhaps he had some notion that there was a bug in her house, and that maybe she knew where it was and he was looking for that. But anyway, the tape apparently ends with more arguing, and then there are sounds as though Monroe is perhaps drunk or drugged and sort of lurching around the place, and there's a sort of a struggle, and then a bump, and then some talk between Robert Kennedy and Lawford about laying her down on the bed, and there the tape ends, or at least the tape so far as it was heard by the witness I talked to.
A frightening scenario. Was she drugged? And remember, Dr. Greenson said she sounded drugged when she called that afternoon. Did RFK and the other man find anything? The diary, any of the listening devices? And this brings us to the new evidence. Evidence that could finally answer the question, how did Marilyn Monroe die? Sam Giancana, the mafia boss, is accused in a book called Double Cross by the man who knew him best, his own brother Chuck, of sending 2 men, Needles Gianola and Muggsy Tortorello, along with 2 other accomplices, to Marilyn's that night. According to Chuck Giancana, the hitman used a lethal suppository to execute Marilyn Monroe. The book says the killer was Sam Giancana, with the full knowledge of some members of the CIA. It fills in the final details of the plan, which could finally explain one of Hollywood's oldest mysteries. The scenario for Marilyn's execution, as presented by Chuck Giancana, fits in with everything we know about Marilyn's last hours. According to Chuck, on the day she died, RFK came to Marilyn's house with Peter Lawford, and an agitated Marilyn was sedated and put to bed. Soon after, Kennedy and Lawford left. Then the killers entered the house and overpowered the star. Marilyn's life was coming to a close. The killers inserted a lethal suppository of fast-acting barbiturates, the perfect murder weapon, since it would be so difficult to detect. Marilyn slipped into a coma. The killers slipped into the night. to await the downfall of America's #1 crime fighter. But within an hour, a wide-ranging cover-up would be orchestrated. Phone records linking Marilyn and RFK would be suppressed. The house would be swept clean, RFK's itinerary rearranged.
This is not only possible, I think that given all the evidence, that it is very probable that something like this did happen.
Anthony Summers wrote the definitive book on Marilyn, Goddess, The Secret Lives of Marilyn Monroe. Though cautious, he says these charges are consistent with his investigations.
If people in the mafia were interested in getting dirt on the Kennedys and Marilyn Monroe, then Marilyn Monroe was a sitting target. As a matter of fact, Sam Giancana's right-hand man in California, Johnny Roselli, had known Marilyn from way back, from the late 40s, early 50s.
As we've seen, Bobby and Marilyn were at times flagrant lovers, venturing out in outrageous disguises, throwing off their clothes on a beach, even as Marilyn was intimately involved with Bobby's arch-enemy, Sam Giancana. Marilyn's good friend, Jeanne Carmen, saw them together. FBI agent William Romer tailed Marilyn and Giancana to the Cal Neva Lodge in Lake Tahoe, where Marilyn submitted to demeaning sex orgies with the mobster. And this at a time when she was angry and frustrated over her break with Bobby Kennedy.
There were a couple photographs left that were taken at Cal Neva, and she looked pretty bad.
It's not hard to imagine a hardened killer like Giancana murdering Marilyn to destroy RFK. And at least partial corroboration comes from the Chicago Crime Commission. They confirmed the hitmen named in the book, Leonard Needles Gianola and James Muggsy Tortorello, were both made members of the Chicago Mafia. And further corroboration comes from the Justice Department, according to Anthony Summers.
They believed that the mob had been involved in her death and that the whole thing had been an attempt to set up Robert Kennedy. That was what Justice Department officials were saying right back then. The whole thing hangs together.
Even the FBI seems to corroborate a Giancana-backed hit. Summers cites the statements of former FBI Assistant Director Courtney Evans.
He said to me, yes, there was an attempt, though by organized crime, to bring pressure on the Kennedys. And when I asked him to go into detail, he declined. He simply pointed me towards Sam Giancana.
But the book also alleges a CIA connection. In fact, Chuck Giancana charges that CIA operatives actually requested that the hit be put on Marilyn. But why?
What secrets did Marilyn's living room hold? What did she know? Apparently too many secrets to keep her safe.